anybody told you one? Have you any idea why?
Back in the garage for part 2 of this 5-part series where I talk about 5 of my favorite baits to throw in the fall season, stuff that I have confidence in, stuff that I've caught fish on year in and year out, and yeah, just going into depth about how I'm using these baits, some of the colors and brands, and the rod and reel setup that I like to use, just so I can share my knowledge and my experience to help you guys catch fish out there on the water. So a couple days ago, we talked about jerk baits. So I gave a rundown on that. If you haven't seen that video, definitely check it out. Some good information. And this week, why do I keep saying week? Today we're going to talk about shallow crankbaits. So staying on the hard bait trend. And yeah, so to start off, for anybody who's new to bass fishing or hasn't used a crankbait or a shallow running crankbait, this is kind of what they look like. They're generally about 1 inch to 2 inches long. They've got a bill, which is what allows them to dive down to their target depth. And then that bill also allows them to deflect off of different cover in the water. So rocks, stumps, branches of lay down trees, or even grass. And so that's a part of the appeal of the shallow crankbaits, is that they're amazing at deflecting, and that deflection can be a trigger for those bass that are up there to feed. And so some of the areas that I like to target is like rocky banks. You can definitely get up there like shallow. Don't be afraid to throw into like a foot of water even, especially if you got a little stain in the water. So rocky banks is good. Anywhere that there's some isolated like tree laydowns in the water, those are amazing areas where fish will hold to ambush bait fish. And also weed lines can be a really good area if you still have healthy grass in your fishery. You definitely don't want to be fishing like dying grass, because it's not holding oxygen, it's not holding life, and so those fish are going to vacate those areas. But if you still have some healthy grass, some crunchy green grass, definitely don't be afraid to still target that even as the water cools. Jumping into some of the baits that I like to use, probably my number one that I like to throw is this River to Sea Biggie. This is the rattling version. It's the Ish Monroe crankbait, been out for a while. It definitely catches fish. That one's got a nice knock. It's a nice round crankbait, so it's got a wide wobble, and they've got some good colors. Another bait that I like is the Lucky Craft for the LC 1.5. So this is like that very standard square bill crankbait size, that 1.5 size. Perfect in most situations. Fish will eat that, and it comes in all the great Lucky Craft colors. This one's silent, so kind of a good contrast to that River to Sea, which has that loud knock that in some situations maybe the water's a little cleaner or the fish are a little finicky. I might switch over to that Lucky Craft silent version just to be a little more finessey. And then third square bill, the Jackall Aska. It's an old bait, been out for a few years now, but I've been throwing this thing since I was in like high school, and that thing catches fish. It's got a square bill, but it's a different material. It's like a circuit board material, so it's pretty sturdy. It doesn't break like some of those other plastic bills, and it also has really good deflection. And then if you're on a little bit of a budget, you cannot go wrong with the Strike King 1.5. Even if you're not on a budget, this is just a good bait to throw. This is the hard knock version, so it's got one single rattle, kind of a deeper knock, as opposed to some of those other baits that are like more of a tinny BB sound. And then these are they're a little different crankbaits. These would be more on the flat side end of things. So they've got flat sides, hence the name. They've got a tighter wiggle, tighter vibration. And once again, for situations where those fish are a little more finicky, where the water's cleaner maybe, it's cooling off, and you can't get bit on some of those other more aggressive crankbaits, the flat side crankbaits are good. This one is the Evergreen Flat Force, I believe. That's a good one I've been playing around with this year. And then the Rapala OG Slim, the Odds Garage bait, super nice. It's a more subtle wobble, similar to that Flat Force. So in situations where you can't get bit on those other baits, definitely try out a flat side bait, and you might be able to get some of those fish that wouldn't commit to those more aggressive wobbling baits. So yeah, we went into baits. Now we'll talk about colors. Sticking with the bait fish trend, like I talked about last video, the fall season, those bass are looking to feed up. A lot of times they're targeting shad or silver sides or the smaller bait fish that are starting to group up as the water cools off. And so a lot of the colors that I'm going to be throwing are shad imitating. And so sticking with those silvers and whites and those more pearly colors. So this one here is called Abalone Shad. It's got some greenish blue on the back. It's got kind of a silvery foily flash, and then it's got a black shad dot. So that's a great one. The Strike King is kind of a more translucent color, so if I'm targeting clear water, I want something a little more subtle. That's a good color. It's kind of ghosty. This one here is it's similar. It's kind of ghosty, but it's also got a lot of flash. So if you're around a lot of bait fish and you want to get the attention of the bass, standing out with a little bit of flash in your bait definitely doesn't hurt. This one is the Lucky Craft, and that's in the Chartreuse Shad. That bait is a little more of a solid color, more of a solid white, and so if you've got some stain in your water and you want to stand out, help those fish find your bait a little better, that can be a good option. And then on the total, opposite end of the spectrum, yeah, if that water is like super dirty and you need some extra color, like some real pop, something with some chartreuse, or even just straight up chartreuse and black can be the ticket to getting those fish to go. There's definitely some lakes around here that have been pretty much dirtier all year since we got that heavy rain in the late winter, and so I've found myself throwing chartreuse a little more throughout the year and even into the fall season. And then there is times when I'll transition over to a crawfish color. Those bass definitely aren't strictly on shad, so you don't need to feel like you have to throw white, but yeah, those red colors definitely get bit. This is that river to sea in kind of a ghosty crawfish color. It's called cold-blooded, or even some of those brighter reds and oranges and that stained water. Those are good colors. On the delta, as always, red out there gets bit year round, but really just matching the hatch. If you don't have shad in your lake, definitely don't throw shad colors. Throw bluegill colors, or throw crawfish colors, or whatever the predominant forage in your lake is. That's what you want to be imitating. I'm just focusing more on shad because that's shad and silver sides, because that's what the bass are feeding on for me in my lakes this time of year. Next up would be line, which for crankbaits is definitely really important. Kind of similar with the jerkbaits, your line size will dictate the running depth of your bait. So a lot of these crankbaits are like 2 to 5 feet running, so they're shallow crankbaits. But if you run some lighter lines, say 10 or 12 pound fluorocarbon, you can get them down to that max depth, that 5 foot or even 6 foot depth range. If you're, say you're fishing a steeper drop off and those fish seem like they're holding off that ledge in a little bit deeper water, you want to hit that 6 foot range, but have that action of the shallow crankbait. You could go down in line size and, kneel and reel, get that bait down there, and sometimes that can be key. And then on the opposite end, if you're really shallow, you're around some heavy cover, you're around like wood and grass, you want to bump up, you can go 14, 15, even 16 pound test fluorocarbon, always fluorocarbon, and just really bang that bait around and not have to worry about breaking off on those fish. The good thing about crankbaits is you're using like a light rod, and so the rod is absorbing a lot of that load, and the stress is not on the line for the most part. It's going to be on the rod, and so you can get away with lighter line than you would on something where you're really setting the hook and pulling on those fish with a stiffer rod. And now that I'm talking about rods, we'll transition into talking about the rods that I like to use for square bill crankbaits. The main one that I'm throwing, it's a budget rod, but it's just done well for me, and so I kind of stick to it. It's the Dobyns Fury 705 CB. So it's a crankbait rod, as the name says, CB. It's got that super soft tip, so it bends well into the blank, and that's important for, you got these small treble hooks. Those things, they're pretty easy to pull out of a bass's mouth, especially if your rod is too stiff. And so having that soft rod, when they eat it, the rod just loads up, it sort of slowly bends, and you can reel into those fish. You really don't have to set the hook, and then it just makes fighting them really easy. The rod's doing a lot of the work. It's keeping those small treble hooks in their mouth. And yeah, as long as you have a soft rod, you should be able to land a lot of those fish, just playing with your drag and not horsing them too much. So that 705 is a good a good action. The Fury series is a little bit softer. And I've also got the Dobyns Cadence series. Let's see which. This is the 735 CB, so still a 5 power, but this one's a little more stiff, and it's also a little bit longer rod. So I can make longer casts. If I'm just covering water down a long bank and I want to make a long cast parallel with the rock, that longer rod might be a better option. And then that stiffer, somewhat stiffer action, it's still pretty whippy, but it's a little stiffer. And so if I'm around grass or wood and I want to either rip my bait out of the grass or just as I'm getting bit around some of those trees or heavier cover, just wanting to have a little more power to pull on those fish and get them out of that cover, that little bit heavier action rod can be important. And so those are the two that I use. They've done well for me. You don't need a super long rod for shallow crankbaits, because a lot of times you're making target casts, you're throwing at specific stuff along the bank, and you want to have that shorter rod to kind of make those accurate casts. So staying in that 7 foot to 7.3 range is probably good for most people. And then last but not least, the reel. For cranking, I would say anywhere from like a 6:2 gear ratio to a 7:1 is probably good. I know some people go faster into the 8:1, but I think that might be a little too fast. But you can play around with it. I think for me, I like the 7:1 gear ratio. It's enough speed to like really be able to burn that bait and trigger those fish, but it's not so fast that I'm just moving the bait too fast and missing bites. So I like that 7:1. Once again, I'm using Shimano reels. It's my go-to. This is the Shimano Metanium 13 and that XG, or not XG, HG. So that 7:1 gear ratio. And then I think on here I've got 14-pound test. Just that peace of mind, being around some of those more chunky rocks and laydowns and stuff. I can just know that my line's not going to break in that heavier cover. So that's what I'm running. But definitely shallow crankbaits are an amazing way to catch fish this time of year. You can just burn bank, cover water. Like I said, paralleling rocky banks is great. Like target casting at laydowns is great. You can even like bang them around dock pilings and stuff like that if you have that on your lake. But they're very versatile baits. You can use them in a lot of different situations. And like I talked about, there's variations. There's so many crankbaits out on the market. Flat side crankbaits, more rounded body crankbaits, rattles, no rattles, and then thousands of colors, so that you can match the forage that you have in your body of water. So play around with baits, play around with colors, and I think that's about it. Maybe one more tip is change your hooks. A lot of these baits, although they have amazing action and performance, the bait companies will skimp on the hooks. They'll put cheap hooks to kind of keep the cost down, and a lot of them, they might start out sharp, but they will dull really quick, and so you catch a couple fish or you bang into some rocks, you get hung up on a piece of wood, they're automatically dull, and then that next bite you get, that fish throws the bait because your hooks are dull. So just take the extra time, change out your hooks. Gamakatsu's owners are great options. I'll link all this stuff in the description, including the hook replacements. But yeah, just take that extra time, change your hooks out, just so you don't have to worry about it. You know you've got sharp, strong hooks on, and that's one less thing you got to worry about. So have your stuff dialed in, your line, your rod, your reel, your bait, your hooks, and you should have no reason why you can't go out and catch fish today, tomorrow, this weekend, whatever. So that's kind of my rundown on shallow crankbaits. Once again, if y'all have any questions, drop them in the comment section. Let me know how you're liking this series. So now we're 2 baits in. I think next video will probably transition away from the hard baits and start talking about some soft swim baits or something like that. But you'll have to tune in on the next one for that. So appreciate y'all watching, and I'll catch you on the next video. Peace.